He was renowned for the meticulous organisation of his studio. His efficiency and the quality of service he provided for his clients became legendary. Raphael employed a group of assistants to take over the bulk of his work, freeing him to execute the important sections of the paintings, the faces and hands in particular. He made sure that all his students were taught to draw and paint like him, so their work was indistinguishable from that of their masters. In this way, he was able to take on a vast number of commissions and run a hugely profitable business. In another shrewd move, he employed an engraver, Marcantonio Raimondi, to make prints of many of his paintings, so that his work became known to a wider public. He even created images solely for reproduction, like this Massacre of the Innocents, a popular if brutal image from the Master of the Madonna and Child. According to numerous contemporary accounts, Raphael attracted many admirers. Wherever he went, he was followed by a train of students and friends, prompting Michelangelo to mock him, comparing him to a sergeant with his troop. Raphael responded to the insult by calling Michelangelo the hangman on account of his dour and reclusive manner. In 1515, Raphael finally got the chance to compete directly with the artist he most wanted to surpass, Michelangelo, when the new Pope, Leo X, commissioned Raphael to produce a series of tapestries to hang on the lower walls around the Sistine Chapel. Of course, Raphael himself didn't produce tapestries. What he did was produce the designs, cartoons as they're known. A series of images made on sheets of paper, roughly so big, bound together with a primordial kind of glue, and then usually sketched on by the artist using charcoal, so black and white lines are produced so that the textile manufacturers can then use them, cut in vertical strips, to weave the composition. But in fact, what Raphael does is something unprecedented in the history of art. He produces full-sized designs for the tapestries in glorious Technicolor, depicting scenes from the New Testament, in particular the lives of St. Paul and St. Peter, the founding fathers of the Roman Catholic Church, and particularly episodes were chosen that showed the idea of conversion and inspiration that somehow might unite a church that was under increasing threat. St. Peter is always with yellow and blue, St. Paul is always with green and red, and that's how we distinguish the saints throughout the series. And what we have here at the Victoria and Albert Museum are 10 of the cartoons that exist from what now art historians think was a series of 16. And it's all about process. Perhaps never before has an artist's approach to drawing, to colour, and then to the transfer from one medium to another been so dramatically shown as they are here. On one wall you can see the cartoon for the miraculous draught of fishes, the episode in the Bible where Christ says to the fishermen, who later become his disciples, throw your nets over that side of the boat after they'd found nothing, and then suddenly they're teeming with fish. And we see how Raphael designs the cartoon, but he has to design it in a mirrored image. And on the opposite wall is the tapestry itself. Now, it's probably sacrilegious to say it, because of course that is supposed to be the finished work of art. But the cartoons themselves, where Raphael and his assistants have worked up, in some ways are much more moving, much more powerful. That's where we see Raphael struggling to bring the figures to life and to fill them with this vibrant colour. These cartoons had a huge impact on art, particularly in Northern Europe. Later major artists like Rubens and Poussin were directly inspired by the lessons that Raphael was teaching in these works. Raphael continued to thrive in Rome. He was universally admired for his painting and also his manners. His exuberant and extroverted personality also expressed itself in the seedier side of 16th century Italy. In stark contrast to the sweet and pious Madonnas, which had first made him famous, Raphael was reputed to possess an insatiable appetite for women. He had no problem satisfying his lust in Rome. In a city where there were so many celibate clerics, there was no end of young single women available, and Raphael and his friends took full advantage. In a letter to his uncle, Raphael once mentioned his fruitless quest for a suitably perfect wife, and in another letter he complained about the famine of beautiful women in Rome. He never married, but often kept mistresses. Some of them sat as models for his paintings, like La Fornarina. But in his depiction of beauty, Raphael abandoned the faithful portrayal of nature which so many 15th century artists had sought. Instead, he deliberately used an imagined type of beauty. This was the case with this picture, Galatea, painted in 1511. It's a fresco of the sea nymph, who hears our lover singing as she rides across the waves. Galatea is a great example of the sensual but remote, almost unattainable beauty for which Raphael became famous. When asked where he'd found the model for the beautiful creature in this famous painting, Raphael replied that having been unable to find a suitably beautiful woman in Rome, he'd been forced to resort instead to a certain idea that springs from my mind. Fittingly enough, for one so concerned with idealised forms in art, in 1516 Raphael was made curator of Roman antiquities and given the task of cataloguing and preserving the city's Roman ruins. These appointments perhaps stimulated his own interest in building. Raphael had begun to dabble with what was then known as the mother of the arts, architecture. He'd made the sketches and then designs for friends' palaces, and in turn he'd caught the eye of the Pope, Leo X, who in 1514, on the death of Bramante, made Raphael chief architect of this building, St. Peter's, Rome. And so Rome had delivered everything Raphael wanted of it: fame and success, and an increased salary, and he was ready to live the good life. Raphael's frolicking with Roman high society also had profound implications for his art. It gave him privileged access to parts of the city that other artists couldn't reach. And this is most clearly seen in the intimate portraits he made of Rome's elite, for which he became ever more celebrated. In 1513, Pope Julius II died, but his successor, Leo X, from the powerful Medici banking family, was also impressed by Raphael and commissioned him to do more work in the Vatican. Over the next 5 years, their relationship became very close, and Raphael, who managed to put his sitters at ease, finally got the commission to paint the Pope himself, and that sense of rapport is strongly evident. Rather than just showing Leo X on his own, though, Raphael depicts him with his two nephews, Giulio de' Medici and Luigi de' Rossi, their cardinals, and the whole painting is a kind of symphony in red, of different tones of red paint. But what we see, I think, is a man of great power in this God-given office, seemingly isolated, alienated, vulnerable amidst the people that he's with. He stares off into the distance, and it's as if he's been captured in an unguarded moment, and a moment of great intimacy. And in fact, the year this work was painted, 1518, the church had been thrown into a cataclysm, because a German monk called Martin Luther had just nailed a series of protestations on the door of a church in Wittenberg, and over the next 3 decades, the church was split. And what Raphael gives us, unwittingly maybe, is an image of the man at the eye of that storm. Still in his 30s, Raphael had acquired an unprecedented position in the cultural life of the papal court, and a growing international reputation too. The future appeared to promise only increased stature and wealth, but Raphael's life was to be short. His biographer, Vasari, records that it was ultimately the artist's womanizing exploits that were his undoing. He secretly attended to his love affairs, Vasari wrote, and pursued his amorous pleasures beyond all moderation. On one occasion, the writer said, he happened to be even more immoderate than usual and returned home with a violent fever. Too proud to confess the true nature of his illness, Raphael was given the wrong treatment by doctors. He was bled and grew faint and weak. He died shortly afterwards on his birthday in 1520. He was just 37 years old. In accordance with his status at the papal court, Raphael was buried with outstanding honours. His corpse lay in state at the Vatican, and then received the unique honour, for artists, of burial in the Pantheon, a fitting tribute to one who so admired the classical world. Raphael's art became the model for the teaching academies which later flourished across Europe. And for the next 4 centuries, in many respects, Raphael was the dominant figure in Western art.